The morning air stung with cold as Daniel Cooper turned into the parking lot of Willow Creek Elementary. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a dull gray sky, the kind that clung to your coat and melted on your cheeks. His boots crunched on the icy gravel, the only sound breaking the hush of a town still waking up. It was just after 7 a.m., the hour he usually arrived, coffee thermos in hand, lesson plans tucked under one arm, and thoughts still foggy from sleep. But this morning, something pulled him out of routine. Across the street, right by the school bus stop, a small shape sat motionless in the snow. At first, he thought it might be a trash bag or a bundle of clothes someone had dropped. But as he looked closer, he saw it, ears too big for its head, fur soaked and clinging to its thin frame, tail curled tight around its paws. A puppy. Daniel felt his steps slow, the cold suddenly forgotten. The dog didn't move. Didn't bark. Just stared at him with dark, searching eyes. A German shepherd, maybe 4 months old at most. The kind of dog that would one day grow tall and strong, but for now looked small, awkward, and heartbreakingly alone. Around its neck was a scarf, bright red against the pale backdrop of snow. Not something a grown man would tie. No, this was a child's scarf, knotted carefully like a gift someone couldn't bear to give in person. Daniel crossed the street before he knew he'd decided to. The snow squeaked beneath his soles as he approached, slow and cautious, like the dog might spook and run. But the puppy stayed perfectly still. "Hey there, buddy," Daniel said softly, crouching a few feet away. "Where's your person?" The dog didn't respond, of course. But it didn't retreat either. It simply tilted its head, eyes locked on his, ears twitching at his voice. Then Daniel saw it, tucked beneath the scarf, clipped gently to the collar with a small plastic pin. A note. His fingers trembled as he reached for it. It was damp around the edges, written in blocky, uneven letters. "Her name is Rosie. She's gentle. Please take care of her. I had no other choice." No signature. No phone number. Just the raw finality of someone who had let go of something they loved. Daniel swallowed hard. "Rosie," the note said. The puppy didn't flinch when he reached out his hand. Instead, she leaned forward, ever so slightly, and pressed her cold, damp nose into his palm. Her fur was wet, her body light, too light. He could feel her ribs beneath the matted coat. The scarf fluttered in the wind as she leaned in again, and Daniel whispered without thinking, "You're safe now." He looked down the empty street, quiet except for the snow and the ache of something he couldn't name. He lifted Rosie into his arms, and she didn't resist. Just let out the softest sigh and tucked her head under his chin. That was the moment everything changed. Daniel walked briskly across the parking lot, his coat pulled tight against the wind, one arm wrapped around the small, shivering body in his arms. Rosie didn't struggle. She didn't squirm or bark or cry. She simply pressed into him like she'd been waiting all morning for someone to say yes. He opened the side door of the school with his shoulder, careful not to jostle her. The hallway inside was quiet, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. Most of the staff wouldn't arrive for another 20 minutes. Daniel's classroom sat at the end of the hall, the last door on the right, where a small window let in just enough light to paint the floor in pale gray streaks. He set Rosie down gently on a folded fleece blanket he kept in the trunk of his car, usually for emergencies. Her paws barely touched the fabric before she curled into a tight ball, her nose tucked beneath her tail. She was still damp, and every few seconds, her body shivered in small, involuntary bursts. Daniel turned on the space heater near his desk and angled it toward her. The warmth spread slowly across the room, making the air a little less sharp. He knelt beside her, brushing a few strands of fur away from her eyes. They followed his every movement. His thoughts kept returning to the note, the sharp slant of the handwriting, the way the ink had run just a little from moisture. It hadn't been written in a hurry. The letters were deliberate, careful, and spaced far apart, like someone trying not to cry. "Her name is Rosie. She's gentle. Please take care of her. I had no other choice." He read it again, even though he already knew the words by heart. No name. No way to find the writer. But there was something unmistakable in those lines: grief. The kind a child carries when they're asked to make an impossible decision. Daniel sat back on his heels and exhaled slowly. He hadn't planned on taking in a dog. His days were structured, predictable, safe. It had taken him nearly 2 years to settle into a rhythm after losing his wife. Even now, silence clung to the corners of his house. He hadn't invited anyone into that space. Not even a goldfish. But Rosie wasn't noise. She was presence. Quiet, calm, steady. He reached for his phone and called the school office, telling them he'd be a few minutes late to start class. No details. Just time. Next, he dialed animal control, checking if anyone had reported a missing puppy. Nothing. Then he skimmed a few neighborhood posts online. Still nothing. Rosie stirred under the desk. Her head peeked out from the blanket, eyes still locked on him. He wasn't used to being watched that way. Not with expectation. Not with trust. He poured a bit of water into a bowl and slid it toward her. She lapped it slowly, politely, like she didn't want to impose. Then, when she finished, she leaned against his foot, her body finally still. Daniel looked down at the scarf still knotted around her neck. That simple note had shifted something in him. Not just sympathy. Not just curiosity. It felt like a door opening. One he hadn't realized was still locked. The first day Daniel brought Rosie home, the snow was still falling. Light flurries dusted the porch steps as he unlocked the door to his modest, 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Missoula. The kind of house built for a family, though these days it stood far too quiet. Rosie paused at the threshold, unsure. Her paws touched the welcome mat, but she didn't move forward. She looked up at him, tail giving the faintest twitch, ears tucked halfway back. He knelt down and patted the floor just inside. "It's okay, girl," he said gently. "You can come in." She took one tentative step. Then another. Her claws clicked softly on the wood floors as she crossed the entryway. It was like watching someone test the ground after a long winter, afraid it might give way. Daniel unwrapped the red scarf and set it gently on the console table near the door. It was still damp. Still carried the shape of a child's hands. Inside the house, Rosie walked carefully, never more than a few feet away from Daniel. She didn't explore the way most dogs might. Instead, she moved slowly, her eyes scanning each room, as if searching for something familiar. Or someone. In the kitchen, Daniel opened a can of chicken and rice stew, the closest thing to dog food he had, and filled a small ceramic bowl. Rosie approached it cautiously, sniffed, then began to eat with quiet focus. Not ravenous, but hungry in a way that made Daniel's stomach twist. Like she didn't quite trust that there would be a second meal. After she finished, she walked over to where he stood at the sink and sat. Just sat. Not asking for more, not making a sound. Just being there. That night, he made up a soft bed for her beside his. An old quilt folded over a thick rug. But when he turned out the lights and slid under the covers, Rosie didn't curl into the bed he'd made. Instead, she stood for a moment, then settled on the floor right beside him, her head resting lightly against his hand. Daniel didn't move it. Didn't say a word. He just lay there in the darkness, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing, like the ticking of a clock that had once stopped and just started again. He hadn't slept that well in months. The next morning, Rosie followed him from room to room as he got ready. She didn't bark or whine. She didn't demand attention. She was just there. Present in a way that filled the empty spaces without crowding them. At school, the kids gasped when they saw her poke her head out from his office door. Her big ears perked, tongue just peeking out. Rosie looked around the classroom like she already knew she belonged there. One student whispered, "Is that your dog, Mr. Cooper?" Daniel paused. Then said, "Her name's Rosie. She's staying with me for now." It was the first time he'd said her name aloud in front of others. The words felt strange and right all at once. During recess, Rosie laid by his feet while he graded papers. When a student named Liam, quiet, withdrawn, often alone, wandered over and sat near her, Rosie didn't move. She simply leaned against his leg. Liam stayed there for 10 minutes, silent. Then, out of nowhere, he started talking. About a book he'd read. About a dream he'd had. Rosie just listened. Like she always did. Daniel watched, a lump forming in his throat. He didn't know what Rosie had been through before that snowy morning at the bus stop. But he knew what she was doing now. She was healing something. Not just in the kids. In him. Rosie became a fixture at Willow Creek Elementary faster than Daniel could have imagined. By the end of her first week, it was as if she had always been there, slipping through the hallways, curling up under his desk, greeting students at the door each morning with a quiet grace that was never loud or playful, but somehow still magnetic. She didn't need to bark or jump or chase tennis balls to capture attention. She did it with stillness. With presence. She saw people, really saw them, and they felt it. That Friday, just before lunch, Ms. Annie Blake, the school counselor, stepped into Daniel's classroom with a curious smile. Rosie, lying at Daniel's feet, perked her ears. She didn't get up, didn't move, but watched Annie like she'd been expecting her. Annie crouched beside her and placed a gentle hand on Rosie's back. Rosie leaned in, just slightly, eyes soft. "She's got something special," Annie whispered. Daniel nodded. "I've never seen a dog behave like this. She just knows." Annie smiled. "She doesn't just notice people. She reads them." Daniel didn't reply, but her words sat with him for hours. Over the next few days, more patterns emerged. Rosie would sit beside students who were struggling, without prompting. One morning, when a new girl named Ava came in late, eyes red and puffy from crying, Rosie quietly walked to her desk, rested her head on Ava's knee, and stayed there until the girl stopped shaking. Rosie never demanded. She offered. Daniel began to notice something else, too. At home, Rosie wasn't just his companion. She was his mirror. When he cooked dinner, she sat in the kitchen doorway, watching quietly. When he read the paper on the couch, she would rest her chin on the armrest, eyes closed, just near enough to touch. But it was at night that her presence mattered most. Daniel had struggled with sleep since the day his wife, Helen, passed. At first, it was the silence that kept him up. Then it was the weight of memories, of things unsaid. The house had felt too big, too still. But with Rosie there, curled on the floor beside him, her soft breathing like a heartbeat against the quiet, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full. Like the space was being lived in again. He caught himself talking to her sometimes. At first it was small things, how work had gone, what he planned to make for dinner. But slowly, his words turned deeper. About Helen. About the ache that still gripped him when he heard their wedding song at the grocery store. About the way grief could feel like a fog that rolled in without warning. About the guilt he carried, for surviving, for moving forward, for laughing again. Rosie never looked away. She didn't try to fix anything. She didn't offer platitudes. She just stayed. And somehow, that was enough. The idea of therapy dogs hadn't occurred to Daniel until he started noticing how much Rosie was helping others, not just him. One afternoon, he typed the phrase into his browser, "Certified Therapy Dog Requirements." There were pages and pages of information, about temperament tests, obedience training, exposure to wheelchairs, to sudden noises, to strangers. Rosie hadn't gone through any of that, and yet, she already acted like she had. Could she be trained? Or was she simply born for this? He clicked through websites and videos until one clip made him pause. A golden retriever lying next to a child during a hospital procedure. No words. No commands. Just comfort. Daniel looked across the living room. Rosie was curled at his feet, her head resting beside a small stuffed toy, a plush squirrel Tyler had given her during their last visit. She glanced up at him, tail thumping softly on the floor. "I think you've already passed every test," he said quietly. She blinked slowly. As if she agreed. By the second week, Rosie was more than a classroom companion. She had become a silent guide. A constant. When a student named Jonah had a panic attack during a math quiz, Rosie walked straight to him, laid across his feet, and stayed until his breathing calmed. No command. No training. It was instinct. That's when Daniel knew. She wasn't just a good dog. She was a healer. And maybe, just maybe, that was why she'd been left at the bus stop in the first place. Not abandoned, but placed. So she could find the people who needed her most. The more Daniel watched Rosie find her place at school, the more he thought about the red scarf and the note. The image of her sitting quietly at that snowy bus stop kept returning, how she hadn't looked lost, exactly, but rather as if she'd been waiting. Planted, not left. And the more he saw how Rosie connected with people, especially the children who needed her most, the more he was haunted by the thought of who had let her go, and why. One evening, after most of the staff had gone home and Rosie was napping under his desk, Daniel sat at his computer, the soft glow of the screen casting shadows across the empty classroom. He clicked through missing pet pages again. Local rescue groups. Craigslist. Facebook neighborhood groups. He widened the search to shelters up to 50 miles out. But still, nothing. There were no reports about a lost German Shepherd puppy with a red scarf. She didn't belong to just anyone. That scarf, it was too personal. A child had tied that knot. The block lettering on the note, it wasn't rushed, but careful. Like someone had held the paper in their hands for a long time before writing anything down. That kind of heartbreak had weight. It didn't just vanish. Daniel couldn't let it go. The next morning, he stopped by the school transportation office and found Kathy, one of the older bus drivers who had been with the school district for over a decade. She was pouring herself a cup of stale coffee from the staff room pot when he approached. "Hey, Kathy," he said. "Can I ask you something kind of odd?" She raised an eyebrow. "Depends how odd." He smiled. "Do you remember seeing a puppy at the bus stop about 2 weeks ago? German Shepherd, red scarf?" Her brow furrowed. Then she let out a breath. "You know what, yeah. Yeah, I do. Thought she belonged to someone in the neighborhood. She was there every morning that week, just sitting. Never caused trouble. Looked like she was waiting for something." Daniel's chest tightened. "Do you remember which stop?" "Corner of Cedar and Waverly. Right by that old red mailbox. Only a few kids still get picked up there since they moved the routes." He thanked her and headed back to the classroom with his thoughts racing. That corner wasn't far. Less than a 10-minute walk. That kind of consistency, every morning, same spot, same time, it wasn't a coincidence. It was routine. A kid's routine. He brought it up with Annie Blake, the school counselor, later that day. They sat across from each other in her office, Rosie lying between them like a silent witness. "Could be someone had to move," Annie said, folding her hands. "Or, something harder." Daniel nodded. "Maybe. I feel like I owe it to whoever left her. They didn't dump her. They trusted someone would find her. That's different." Annie thought for a long moment. "There have been a few kids I've checked in on recently. Quiet ones. 1 or 2 transfers. But nothing that raised flags. You want me to give you some names?" "Just first names," Daniel said. "I don't want to overstep." That afternoon, he started paying closer attention. By Thursday, it was instinct more than logic that pulled him to the edge of the playground, where a boy stood alone near the swings. Not playing. Not reading. Just standing. Daniel recognized him, Tyler Hayes, 4th grade. Quiet. Respectful. Always on time. Never caused a fuss. He had that look Daniel remembered from his own childhood, the kind of stillness that came not from contentment, but from holding something heavy inside. Daniel noticed something else too, the tail of a red scarf poking out of the boy's coat pocket. His heart skipped. He approached slowly, keeping his voice low. "Hey, Tyler. That's a nice scarf." The boy looked down, startled. Then he nodded. It was Rosie's. Daniel's breath caught. Tyler swallowed hard. "She used to walk with me to the bus every morning. But we moved. The new place, it doesn't allow dogs. My mom said we had to give her up. But I couldn't take her to the shelter. I hoped someone good would find her." There was no anger in his voice. Only sadness. Daniel knelt beside him. You did something brave. Tyler blinked fast. Is she okay? Daniel smiled, heart heavy. She's more than okay. She's changing lives, Tyler. Including mine. Tyler looked down, the corners of his mouth twitching. Can I see her sometime? Daniel placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Yeah, buddy. I think she'd really like that. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon when Daniel pulled his truck into the small parking lot of Pineview Park. The ground was still dusted with leftover snow from earlier in the week, the kind that crunched underfoot but no longer clung to boots. He reached over to the passenger seat where Rosie sat upright, ears perked, eyes fixed on the grassy fields beyond the windshield. You ready to see him? He asked softly. Rosie didn't bark. She never did. But her tail thumped twice against the seat, and she shifted forward, as if she already knew who they were there to find. Tyler stood near the bench at the far end of the park, bundled in a navy blue coat, mittens too big for his small hands. His mother stood a few steps behind him, arms crossed against the cold, watching him quietly. Daniel nodded to her from across the lot. She gave a faint smile and stayed back, letting the moment unfold. Rosie stepped out onto the snow-speckled grass and froze for just a second. Her ears tilted forward. Her nose twitched. Then she saw him. Her whole body lit up. She took one slow, cautious step forward, then another, and then she was running. Tyler dropped to his knees in the middle of the park. Rosie, he shouted, his voice cracking through the still air. She barreled into him like a storm of warmth and fur and memory. He wrapped his arms around her neck, burying his face into her coat. Rosie licked his cheek, then his nose, then nestled her head against his chest, whining softly. It wasn't a cry, it was recognition. A reunion. Daniel stood a few feet away, watching, heart swelling. He blinked back the sting in his eyes. They didn't speak for a long time. They didn't need to. Finally, Tyler pulled back just enough to reach into his coat pocket and hold something out in his mittened hand. A small, worn stuffed squirrel. She used to sleep with this, he said, his voice just above a whisper. I didn't know what else to give her. Rosie sniffed it gently, then took it between her teeth, not to chew, but to hold. Like something sacred. Then she walked over to Daniel, placed the toy on his boot, and sat beside him. Quiet. Present. Ready to go. Daniel picked up the squirrel and held it in his palm. We'll keep it with her, he said. Tyler stood slowly, brushing snow from his knees. I miss her, he said. Daniel nodded. She misses you, too. But she's doing something really special now. She's helping people who need her. Every day. Tyler's eyes dropped to the ground. She always made me feel better when things were bad. She still does, Daniel replied. As they turned to walk back to the truck, Rosie glanced over her shoulder again and again, watching Tyler until he disappeared from view. When she finally looked forward, she leaned into Daniel's leg and let out a long, deep sigh. She had said goodbye. But it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the beginning of something even bigger. Monday morning came with clear skies and a soft golden light that filtered through the windows of Daniel's classroom. The snow had started to melt, revealing patches of brown grass and the first hints of spring. Rosie walked beside Daniel as always, but something about her seemed different. Her head was high, steps confident, and in her mouth, she carried the small stuffed squirrel Tyler had given her. Not like a toy, but like a badge of honor. When the students saw her, they erupted with excitement. She brought a toy, one of them shouted. But Rosie didn't drop it. She walked through the room slowly, the squirrel held delicately in her teeth, as if she understood its weight. She paused by Daniel's desk, set it down carefully on her blanket, then curled beside it. A few of the kids watched in silence. Something about the way she carried that toy made them fall quiet, too. It wasn't just play, it was memory. That morning during reading time, Liam raised his hand. The boy who once couldn't say 3 words aloud now looked Daniel in the eye and asked, "Can Rosie sit next to me while I read?" Daniel nodded. Of course. Rosie got up without a word, crossed the room, and settled beside Liam's desk. He opened his book and started reading aloud. Page after page. No one prompted him. No one praised him. He just read, with Rosie's steady gaze making each word a little less scary. Later that day, a girl named Tara came in crying after recess. She'd had a fight with a friend, something small that felt enormous to her 10-year-old heart. Daniel didn't even have to say anything. Rosie stood, walked over, and gently nudged her hand. Tara knelt on the floor, wrapped her arms around Rosie's neck, and cried into her fur. Not loud sobs. Just quiet, shaking grief. When she finally stood, her eyes were clearer. She hugged Daniel before walking out the door. Rosie had done what no teacher, counselor, or friend could do in that moment. She had simply been there. By Thursday, the shift was undeniable. Rosie wasn't just a classroom dog anymore. She was part of the heartbeat of the school. That afternoon, the principal, Mrs. Landry, called Daniel into her office. He walked in with Rosie by his side, the stuffed squirrel still tucked into the front pocket of her vest. Mrs. Landry smiled and slid a flyer across the desk. It was for a therapy dog certification program. "I think you should apply," she said. "She's already doing the job." Daniel stared at the paper, then down at Rosie. Her head tilted slightly as if she understood everything. "She's not even mine," he said quietly. Mrs. Landry leaned forward, voice soft. "She's someone's now." That night, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the application form open in front of him. Rosie lay at his feet, the squirrel beside her, her breathing slow and steady. He filled in the first box, dog's name, Rosie. And just below that, in his own neat handwriting, he wrote, "She has a gift. She sees people. She doesn't flinch at pain. She doesn't need to be taught how to love." He reached down and stroked her head. "We're gonna help a lot of people, you and me." And he meant it. With everything he had. The certification process was long, detailed, and at times exhausting, but it was never difficult for Rosie. Daniel found himself more nervous than she ever was. Each time they walked into a new environment, a loud gymnasium, a medical testing room, a crowded hallway, he'd brace himself, ready to step in if she got overwhelmed. But Rosie never needed rescuing. She just moved calmly through it all, like she was built for this. They trained at a small facility in downtown Missoula, where evaluators tested dogs for temperament, reaction to noise, sudden movements, and interaction with strangers. Rosie passed each round with the kind of quiet grace that left instructors speechless. When they banged metal pans together or dropped clipboards without warning, she didn't flinch. When a stranger in a wheelchair rolled up and reached out a hand, she leaned into the touch. More than once, Daniel heard the same phrase whispered behind clipboards, "She's got the soul of an old dog." One evaluator, a retired combat nurse named Joyce, knelt down after Rosie passed her last practical test. She looked up at Daniel with watery eyes and said, "Are you sure she's a rescue?" Daniel nodded. "She's been through more than most. You can see it." Joyce smiled. "And she's giving it all back." The day the envelope came in the mail, Daniel stood in his kitchen, hands shaking slightly as he opened it. Rosie sat at his feet, head tilted like she knew it mattered. Inside was a certificate with her name, a small laminated badge, and an embroidered vest patch, "Rosie, Certified Therapy Dog." Daniel knelt beside her and clipped the badge onto her vest. She licked his hand once, then sat tall. "You did it, sweetheart," he whispered. She wagged her tail, slow and steady. Their first official visit was to the school's counseling office. Then the library. Then, with growing confidence, to Missoula Children's Hospital downtown. Daniel didn't know what to expect that day. He only hoped Rosie would be able to bring comfort the way she had in school. He didn't have to hope for long. In the pediatric wing, a nurse led them to a room where a 7-year-old boy named Micah had been refusing treatment. Wouldn't speak. Wouldn't eat. His mother sat beside him with red eyes and a clenched jaw, like she was holding her grief inside for his sake. Rosie didn't wait for a command. She padded softly to the boy's bedside, sat down, and waited. No tricks. No begging. Just presence. For minutes, Micah didn't move. Then, slowly, his small hand emerged from beneath the blanket. He touched Rosie's ear. "Hi," he whispered. His mother gasped. The nurse's hand flew to her chest. Rosie laid her head on the boy's stomach and closed her eyes. It was the beginning of something bigger than either Daniel or Rosie could have predicted. From that moment on, wherever Rosie went, she carried more than her vest and badge. She carried connection, healing, hope. And she gave it all away, without ever needing to say a word. Word about Rosie spread quickly after that first hospital visit. It started with quiet conversations in break rooms and hallway whispers among nurses, "You should see what that dog did for Micah." Then came the formal invitations, from the children's wing, the oncology floor, the trauma recovery center. Everyone wanted to meet the dog who didn't bark, who didn't beg, who just showed up and made things feel a little lighter. Daniel adjusted his work schedule. On Wednesdays and Fridays, they visited the hospital. Rosie wore her navy blue therapy vest, her badge clipped neatly to the front. And in the corner pocket, always tucked in like a talisman, was Tyler's stuffed squirrel. In room after room, Rosie brought something Daniel still struggled to name. She didn't perform tricks or follow commands for applause. She didn't fetch or roll over or high-five. What she did, what she gave, was presence. Deep, calming, and completely unshakable. Some children reached for her the second she entered. Others waited days, even weeks, before they dared to touch her. But Rosie never rushed them. She simply settled near their beds, breathing slowly, anchoring them to something steady. There was a girl named Amara, 9 years old, bald from chemo, so thin her hospital gown hung loose on her shoulders. She refused all visitors, turned her face to the wall for days on end. Until Rosie walked in. Amara didn't move that first day. Just glanced over her shoulder as Rosie sat down by the wall. "She looks like the dog from my dreams," the girl whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. "She's real," he said softly. On the third visit, Amara reached out and placed her hand on Rosie's back. Her fingers trembled. Rosie didn't move. "She makes the fear feel smaller," Amara said a week later. "When it gets bad, I hold her ear. It's soft. It helps." Daniel would never forget the day Amara left the hospital. Rosie walked beside her wheelchair all the way to the front doors. Before climbing into the car, Amara leaned down and kissed Rosie's head. "Thank you," she whispered. "For being my brave." At home, Rosie was the same dog. Quiet. Steady. Loyal. She still curled up beside Daniel's bed each night, the squirrel toy beside her. Some evenings, he'd sit on the porch with a blanket over his knees, a mug of tea in hand, and she'd rest her head on his foot like always. She never asked for more than his company. And somehow, that was everything. Daniel found himself smiling more. Laughing, even. The house that once echoed with silence now hummed with a gentle rhythm, meals cooked with music playing, morning routines shared with padded footsteps and tail wags, and conversations whispered to someone who couldn't speak but always listened. One night, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and cast the sky in amber and rose, Daniel looked down at Rosie sleeping beside him. "You carried them," he murmured. "All of them. And you carried me, too." Rosie stirred but didn't wake. The squirrel toy lay beside her, worn and faded, but still whole. She had given so much. And somehow, in giving, she had made herself complete. Sometimes, the most powerful changes in our lives come not through words, but through quiet presence, through the soft nudge of a dog's head, the warmth of their breath beside us, the way they simply stay. Rosie reminded us that healing doesn't always arrive in grand gestures. It can come silently, wrapped in fur and trust, asking for nothing and giving everything. The note that once read, "I had no other choice," became the spark for something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Rosie was not abandoned, she was placed, chosen for a mission her young owner couldn't yet name. And in choosing to let go, Tyler gave Rosie the chance to become who she was always meant to be. For us, the lesson is clear: compassion doesn't require a title, a badge, or perfect circumstances. It begins the moment we decide to show up, to see someone, to stay close when they're hurting, to believe that quiet kindness still has the power to change lives. At Paw Prints and Stories, we believe every animal has a story, and every human has a heart waiting to be changed by one. If Rosie's journey moved you, we invite you to follow along as we share more tales of healing, hope, and the invisible threads that connect us. And now, here's your challenge: who or what in your life is quietly waiting for you to stay? Go find them. We'll be here, ready to share the next story.